Hello, my name is Bernard Lamberel, and I'm the author of The Covenant on the Origin of the Abrahamic Faith by Means of Deification. This is a historical essay in which I argue that Abraham did exist, but made a covenant with a Mesopotamian overlord instead of a god. Biblical chronology. This is a challenge that a lot of people have been tackling and failed to explain. We have all kinds of explanation that just makes no sense. Now, if, and again, we have to go back to the same premise because otherwise our arguments wouldn't hold. If Abraham made a covenant with a Mesopotamian overlord during the Bronze Age, which is rejected by most scholars or virtually all scholars today, but if it happened, it would make sense, don't you think, that we should go and see what Mesopotamian were using to compute time. I mean, what is time, really? For us, a year has 365 days, but back then, who knows? In fact, there were lunar cycles, there were days, so we shouldn't be surprised to have, a Sumerian king list with people having lived 30,000 years. If a year is just a cycle, and if you translate that to a day, then you get to much more reasonable, 70-year-old lifespan. Same thing with Noah and those people. Obviously, it was not using days, but 12 lunar cycles during the Bronze Age, and see how they were handling mathematics and chronologies. So this is what we're going to be doing. So the idea is that at the time, the Mesopotamians were using base 60, not base 10. So if we look at some extra biblical evidence. So first of all, the Bible is not the only book that has problems with mathematics. So I found two, and there's certainly a lot more, but I found two extra biblical evidence that have similar problems. One is Nebuchadnezzar I, an inscription, and the other one is a tablet from Nabonidus. So Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus lived, as you can see here, Nabonidus lived right at the time when the Bible was being recorded or written down and solidified, which is in 550, right during the exile. Nebuchadnezzar lived earlier, just in the Iron Age. But Nabonidus makes reference to a tablet belonging to Burniburiash, where he says that Hammurabi lived 700 years before him. Now, 700 years before Burniburiash takes us way before King Hammurabi. So it doesn't jive. So these guys didn't know how to do math. Same thing on an inscription from Nebuchadnezzar I. He's referring to King Gulkishar as having lived 696 years before him. And again, we're off quite significantly. Now, what happened there? So first of all, Mesopotamia in Babylon invented the sexagesimal numbers. That's why on a watch today we have 60 minutes and 60 seconds as opposed to 100 minutes and 100 seconds. So the Babylonians divided the circles in 360 degrees, and which is still used in astronomy, in the algebra, and so forth. Now, how do we convert from sexagesimal to decimal? So one example I like to take, because I believe that the priests who converted numbers in the Bible, originally in the story, they were facing sexagesimal numbers, and they just misconvert them. And so let's try to pretend we're priests. How would we create a watch that is based on 100 minutes. So imagine that our watch today has 60 minutes. I decide I'd like to have a watch with 100 minutes. So I'm going to create a watch that has 100 minutes. And I'm going to tell you, well, we should meet in a quarter of an hour. Now, if you have a watch with 60 minutes, that will be 15 minutes on your watch is a quarter of an hour. On my watch, it'll be 25 minutes because that's a quarter of an hour. Same thing, 45 minutes becomes 75 new minutes. So applied to year, if we use that same idea, then 15 years should become 25 years, right? And this is exactly what I think the scribes did. They basically applied this conversion system to the years in the Bible. The problem is that that is wrong. Why? Because the minutes on a watch are fraction of a unity, an hour. But years are not a fraction of something. They're just integral numbers. And so you cannot convert, you cannot say that 15 old years or 15 years in sexagesimal equals 25 years in decimal. It doesn't work that way. So how should it be converted? And how should we fix this? So the good thing is you can convert this mistake by multiplying by 6/10. So if you take 25 years, let's say you presume that they would have converted into 25 years, multiply by 6/10, you get 15 years. So you're back to exactly what you should have had to start with. So if we apply this to all the numbers in the Old Testament, not just a selection, but we just systematically apply 6/10 to all the numbers, then we find that Sarah gave birth at 54. Now, the Jewish tradition tells us that Sarah was very old when she gave birth, and it's considered a miracle. And indeed, it is very old, but some women are known to have given birth at 54. So it's not impossible. So we're moving to something that is unlikely, but still possible. Now, if we apply the 6/10 to Borni-Buriash and Nebuchadnezzar, and we multiply 700 years or the 696 years by 0.6 or 6/10, then guess what? We line up exactly with where we should expect, where we expect. So Nebuchadnezzar, exactly 696 times 6/10, 418 years. This is exactly, and that's on this inscription here. So now we get exactly in the middle of the reign of Bulkishar. Same thing if we take the Nabonidus cylinder that refers to Burna-Buriash having lived 700 years after Hammurabi, and we multiply that by 0.6, we get exactly into the reign of Hammurabi. Now, applied to the Bible and the Old Testament chronology, so again, if we look into Exodus, how long they've been slaves in Egypt, the generations after Abraham, and if we add these up, which is what scholars have been trying to do, so from Solomon, we know that Exodus took place 480 years before the construction of the temple. So 480 years takes us somewhere around 1500, which is not at all during the reign of Ramses II, where all other evidence in the Bible tells us we have from the Temple of Solomon, instead of 480 years, multiplied by 0.6, 288, we get bam, right in the reign of Ramses II. If we go back 258 years, this is exactly where the Hyksos were basically pushed out of Egypt, and the number of generations from King Hammurabi, or where the Jewish tradition claims Abraham would have lived, aligns. So this is just kind of a macro, but we're going to be applying this to all the dates in the Bible, and we can actually reconstruct a history that matches what we know. And so we're going to be applying this to all the dates in the Bible to show that it is possible to reconstruct a history and again address some of the issues that scholars have had. And the good thing is that this approach, unlike other approach, is sound in the sense that it doesn't come out of thin air. It makes total sense if Abraham made a covenant with a Mesopotamian king during the Bronze Age, that they would have recorded numbers in Sexagesimal, which was the thing people did back then. And it's very easy to understand how priests that were not as familiar with Sexagesimal numeration would have made mistakes converting these numbers. And we've seen how there are actually examples outside of the Bible where we can see the same problem. So our next episode is going to discuss how we go from Baal to Yahweh, Baal and Asherah. So the Canaanites were worshiping Asherah and Baal, and I alluded earlier to the fact that Baal and Baal Berith was a deity that appears to have been celebrated in Shechem by the descendants of Abraham, and Baal Berith meaning the Lord of the Covenant. That deity shares the same epithet with Yahweh and would become Yahweh, and we're going to see how that transformation might have taken place in our next video. So I hope to see you there. Thanks.